All. I'm recording this because I want to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I just wrapped up on my first playthrough. And I'm not sure if I want to do it in the format of a Moonbase 2 Patreon episode. Um, just because, well, that will take ages to come out. And also, I don't know how I want to approach it in terms of something like that. So rather than hold out, I want to get my thoughts fresh and new and everything else out there in the world. See how they get taken in. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Final Fantasy VII, the original, was my favorite game of all time up until a couple of years ago when I played Steins Gate, which is probably not the fairest comparison because Steins Gate isn't really a game, but no, I played Final Fantasy VII when it came out. I was in love with it from day one, and I played it multiple times over the years, and every single time I've enjoyed it. I adore the world, I adore the characters, I adore the setting, I adore the villains, style, everything. So, as you can imagine, I was both excited and a bit trepidatious about the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake because obviously, what are they going to do? What are they going to change? What's going to get left on the cutting room floor? What's being brought over that's probably going to annoy people? Is it a cheap cash in, etc., etc., etc.? I mean, people have been demanding it for years, but you always have to be careful because a remake of a game. I think Resident Evil 3 is a great sign that a remake of a game is not necessarily going to be amazing because some decisions are going to be made that are going to upset people or like they're going to trim stuff that didn't need to be trimmed or add stuff that didn't need to be added, etc., etc. So I went in to get this cautious. So before I continue, big yonkin spoilers, both for the original game and the new one. Please do not listen to this unless you are okay with spoilers. Um, when I say big, I mean way bigger than I would have said if I'd just started playing the game and I knew someone who had knowledge of Final Fantasy VII, the original. There's some stuff in this that is way the fuck bigger than I was ever expecting to come out. But overall, I think it was an excellent game. Excellent game. Um, I think the changes are almost universally good. And narratively, it is the better game so far. It is better narratively than Final Fantasy VII Original. The characters are more developed. There's a wider cast in terms of side characters. A lot more interesting NPCs at this stage because for anyone who doesn't know, this game only covers Midgar. It doesn't go into the wider world. And while there were a lot of neat characters introduced in the original game, you wouldn't have a lot of random NPCs of note. Like you had stuff like the Corneo and you had the Turks, but Jesse, Wedge, and Biggs, obviously. But what this game does is introduce a ton of minor characters with clear personalities and unique dialogue, and many of them become these interesting little, I won't say side elements, but they're very much part of the world building, I think, because suddenly Midgar feels much more lived in than it was in the original game. But the actual expansion of Midgar, from a 10-hour to a 40-plus-hour experience, is kind of mind-boggling. I think they deserve an infinite amount of praise, an infinite amount of praise for what they've pulled off here. So this, in case you've noticed, this is fairly rambling and random, but we'll try and get some order to it. So basic gameplay is both similar and different. It works on an ATB charge bar methodology. So you have a bar, it increases as you move around, as you use attacks, as you defend, and when that fills up, you can use special abilities, magic, items, stuff like that. So very similar in that sense to the traditional JRPG turn-based system. It's just you're doing a lot more in between. You're doing a lot of action and button mashing and other abilities. Every character has a unique ability. Like Cloud has Punisher mode, which means that he's got stronger attacks. He's much slower, but he can parry easily. And Tifa has moves that are basically strengthening her super moves. She's into unique martial artists and stuff like, or unique martial arts rather, and stuff like that. Um, the combat, I wasn't sure what I thought because at first it reminded me of Tales of Berseria, and while I'm okay with that combat, it's still very lock yourself in on Velvet from Berseria and just play as her. You don't ever really have to switch to anyone else because they'll largely take care of themselves, except for special abilities and a couple of healing spells. Um, Final Fantasy VII will beat the shit out of you if you stick with one character. It is unapologetic. It's brought over the materia system from the original game, which means that you need to have a wide range of spells available at any given time. You need to have a wide range of summons available at any given time, and you need various abilities available. So if you are not using these characters, not using them effectively, you will lose badly. I'm sure there is a way to just play as Cloud and win, but oh my god, that would be a bitch. Um, Also, like when I'm playing, I don't take full advantage of the skill sets available. I tend to lock in a few abilities and stick with them. And I think very tactical players would really deep dive into this combat system. I would say the enemies as well are really good. They're mostly brought over from the original game, but there are some new ones, which also means some of the crazy designs from Final Fantasy VII are brought over and rendered in hyper 1080 whatever p PlayStation 4 Pro, 4K, AK, AK, DC. They're high quality, so it's kind of interesting to see these semi-realistic character models surrounded by these very wacky designs. But what you'll find is that, especially early in the game, you'll have these spikes of difficulty, either from mass groups of enemies or from major bosses. It tends to even out a little bit as the game's going on so that the difficulty is ramping up, but I kind of like that. It makes you feel stronger in the actual moment to moment, day to day battles when you're fighting the small enemies and the guys who shouldn't really be giving you trouble. They don't give you trouble, but then when you're fighting a boss, they can be a right wanker. And it is like it's easy to get swarmed sometimes by some halfway decent minor enemies, and you can die in some surprising scenarios. I died plenty in this playthrough. Um, but then the interesting thing about the combat is that once you figure it out with an individual enemy, they get much easier because it's just so. For me, it feels like the combat's very natural. Um, the visuals of the game are excellent. Some people were complaining they were having texture loading issues. I had it once. Um, I don't know if it's on all PlayStations or just non PS4s or PS Pros, but I found it gorgeous. It's the best looking game on the console, in my opinion. Um, I found the graphics were smooth. I didn't have any glitches. I didn't have any problems at all visually. I was really, really pleased. I think it looked gorgeous. And I think the looks are one of the reasons it's such a big game. It's like 90 gigs over across two Blu-rays. Um, but I think it's really something where there's a lot of love in this game. There's a lot of love. Um, but yeah, combat is really solid. Visuals are really solid. They brought over everything they could. In some way, shape, or form, everything noteworthy from the original game has come across, and I mean everything. Some things have been changed, like Honeybee Inn's been completely reworked, but you still have to do the missions to get the good elements to get the different dresses because now, but you, Tifa, and Aerith all have different dress options. Or Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith, because this is not a self-insertion game. To Christ. Um, and it's a QTE event when you're actually sorting out Cloud's dress, but a unique one. I've never seen one handled like this before. Um, in terms of how they're handling the visuals and everything else, very difficult to get your head around some of it, but it worked. Um, the Yeah, like if you can think of an element from the original Final Fantasy VII Run of Midgar, it's there. It really, really is. Um, that guy Arsik, if you know the old game, you know what I mean. That's there. Um, the opening is the same with just a couple of added extra elements. The Sector 5 playground, having a girder embedded in the slide after Sector 7 plate is dropped, that's there. yeah, it's pretty impressive. I can't think of anything remotely noteworthy that isn't brought across and usually expanded upon. And when we're talking expanded upon, let's talk about some of the new material. Not the biggest new material. I'm talking about the stuff like Wall Market is now way more involved. There's Corneo Coliseum, which is a fighting arena. You've got Johnny's role. Johnny's, who was a kind of running side character for the first part of the game. He has a very extended role in the remake, and I've always been very fond of Johnny, so I'm really happy about that. Uh, Areas are bigger. There's more characters. Every returning character has something new about them. You spend a lot of time with Jesse, Wedge, and Biggs, um, building up their characters, meeting Jesse's mother, getting her backstory. She's the main one of the three, but you also get like Biggs' backstory a bit. Wedge is probably the most mysterious, if you can call Wedge mysterious. Um, there's also stuff like an extra cell of Avalanche. Like it turns out Avalanche is this global body, and our crowd is just basically the guys the main Avalanche group don't want to admit they were working with because they think they were a bit extreme. um, but yeah, and yeah, what I said it before that there was one element I didn't really care for, and that was the new character of Roach, who thankfully ended up being way smaller in the game. Like he didn't have much of a role at all. Um, his dialogue was just bad. Um, One thing that some people are commenting on is the voice acting. I I don't see what the problem is. Um, I think for the most part, 90% of the voice acting is pretty well done. There's not like I said spoilers already, but Zach makes an appearance at the end of the game. I don't like his voice at all, and I don't really care for Roaches. And there's a character called Chadley who I think gave a kind of robotic performance. Um, but the main cast are very solid. I think everyone did an excellent job. Um, Especially Tifa and Barrett. Like I heard people complaining about Barrett, and I said he sounds awesome. He sounds like Barrett. Um, I don't know what people were expecting. Yeah, I'm pleased with the voice cast. The characters themselves, the expanded characters. Aerith has a lot more mystery at this stage than she did in the Midgar run of the first game, which I like. Tying into the ending, I think she knows more than she's letting on. Cloud also is a very interesting take because it's playing up both the sort of stoic hitman he's kind of portrayed as in some media, with the more loose professional that he was in the original game at this stage, and ultimately kind of portraying like Cloud is trying to appear cool. He's trying to appear stoic and dickish, and he is not the nicest person in the world, but he's far from the worst, and he's ultimately got a good heart. Tifa is a real standout for me. I think they added a lot to her character, some of her insecurities, some of her more badass moments. Really built her up into something special, I think. Barrett as well, I think they did something nice with him where they made him more of a spokesperson type, where you can see him as someone who had gathered members of Resistance all together just by the weight of his own personality. Um, and I liked how they handled the early tension between him and Cloud. Red 13 is kind of interesting because I was expecting him to have a much smaller role than he ended up having. Red is in it way more. Like he's part of the combat system, but he's a guest character, so you can't control him. And he has limit breaks. He's got magic and stuff like that, but mostly he just kind of acts as I'd call him a damage sponge. He shows up and enemies, pay attention to him for a minute. But his character is really fun. He's got some good lighthearted moments. He's a bit serious. There's hints that there's some like Aerith calls him a child, and obviously if you know the original game, you know he's basically a young teen for his species. Um, and overall, he came across really well. He's got some really good action sequences, and I'm really glad that by the end of the game, it didn't feel like here are your four playable characters and their friend who just showed up at the end. This felt like a five-man band that was facing this massive opponent together, and I think they really earned that. Um, I could praise this for ages, but the big thing that has started a lot of discussion is the ending, and one other new element, the whispers. So the whispers are brought in. They're also called arbiters of fate, and for a lot of the game, they are kind of there interfering with things in kind of a weird way. They seem to have broken Jesse's ankle at one point. Um, and so on and so forth. And it turns out they are basically the creatures of this world that ensure that destiny follows its predetermined path. So before Jessie hurt her ankle, before they hurt Jessie's ankle, Cloud was being told he wasn't going on the mission to the Sector 5 uh, reactor. And obviously in the first game he did. So Jessie was taking his place, Jessie got her ankle hurt, and suddenly Cloud has to go. And there's a lot of that. Like Hojo is about to reveal a lot of Cloud's background, and suddenly the Whispers show up and drag him off away. Not they don't hurt him, but they drag him away. They bring someone back to life because that character didn't die in the last game, and that's what I mean in the last game. Because depending on how you interpret it, the ending reveals that the remake is either an alternate timeline or it's the real events of Final Fantasy VII. So at the end of the original game, you cut to a scene that looks like Aerith looking at, after all the events that happened, it cuts to Aerith and it's got little dots in her face, and it could be interpreted as her watching over her friends, or something that people sort of said, it looks like her first scene in the game. It looks like she's looking at the pipe and experiencing it, and about to wander off into the slums. This game could be interpreted as that was Aerith having a partial vision of a future that was predetermined, because it turns out Sephiroth and Aerith are somehow aware of what happened in the original game. There are quick flashes of Aerith's death, Meteor, even the very end of the game at Red 13. And the interesting thing is, the Sephiroth clearly doesn't want any of this to play out, because in the original game he loses and the planet is saved, and he basically tricks everyone into fighting his battle for him, destroying the Arbiters of Fate, destroying the Whispers, and freeing him up to have any future he desires. So the remake ends with our heroes making it so the original game doesn't have to happen anymore, and also making it so the bad guy wins, because ultimately Sephiroth is now free of Destiny's control. And this has obviously caused some controversy on the old web, because changes, they're the worst thing. And people have said we're here to see the remake of the story we played all those years ago, and now you're trying to make a new story out of it. I am personally kind of ecstatic with it. I think it makes a lot of early scenes. Like I said, there's the idea you could read it as Sephiroth and Aerith both have knowledge of the old timeline, which means like there's stuff like Aerith calling Cloud a merc before he says he's a merc, or some stuff with Jessie, some stuff with Sephiroth, obviously. That could all be taken as, can all now be reinterpreted with knowledge of the ending as them displaying some partial knowledge of the future, or the original timeline rather. And it's really interesting because there's a moment where they're shown flashes of what was Meteor, like I said, Red 13, stuff like that, and they're going like, "Oh God, no! The bad future is coming." Which, except it's not. The future they're heading for is, it's the best future. At least we thought it was the best future. Maybe it's not. Who knows? Maybe, if you don't like Advent Children, I think it just got erased, or at least altered. So there's that. I'm very curious. I'm very, very curious. Like, here's the thing. Zack's alive, maybe, at the end. Like, he survives the attack by the Shinra soldiers. So how does this play into Cloud's backstory now? Aerith may not die in the Forgotten City. Maybe she'll live. I don't know. I can't say anymore. I mean, I don't know. Like, she is no longer fated to die. Which also means that, oh God, no, the Aerith Cloud shippers might finally be able to say indisputably they get married. But that's something as well. You don't realize it, but there's a relationship sub-mechanic in this where it doesn't affect, like, you can't end up marrying one character, but you get different cutscenes depending on how it plays out, and also like small little differences, like in the last fight, which character joins you in the fight and which doesn't. Uh, ve- Very interesting. I really liked it. There's actually a lot of little cutscenes and choices that I didn't interact with, so I need to. Again, I'm going to be playing this again. Not immediately. I need a break, but I will be playing this again. But yeah, I am fascinated by where this story can go now. The writing here I think is really solid. So I've got no worries about this writing team going out there and making this story the way it is. But really, really, like I'm really happy with this game. It's done everything I wanted it to do. It's done a lot more than I wanted it to do, and it's had very few dropped balls. Like so I saw people saying that side quests were a problem, and I was just the side quests are the same kind of side quests you get in every JRPG. So it's a fetch quest, it's a fight. Those are the two things. You don't have to do them. You'll lose a few hours of gameplay if you don't have to do them. But for me, they were solid. They were enjoyable. I'm I'm really pleased. I don't know what else I would have wanted from this game. I now want to buy all the merch, which I don't have any money for, but I will probably be picking up a few Final Fantasy gears. And I go on like this. There's references to classic poses the characters take. The easiest one is like Red tends to sit down on his haunches when he's talking, um, just like he would in the old game. Or Tifa sometimes stands with one fist on her hip, like she did in the old game. And obviously Cloud, like the victory poses are in it, even though they were not used in the main battles. Oh god, I could go on for hours. I could genuinely go on for hours. What I'm probably going to do is replay. What I'm probably going to do is max out a few things by replaying. I might try to get them to max level. The max level is 50, but I don't know. But what I'll do once I'm happy I've got as much of a loadout as I'm going to have, I'm probably going to take a few weeks off the game or maybe a month off, and I'm going to come back to it and play through on hard, which I get the feeling will be very hard. Um, yeah, no, really good boss fights, really good, just really good. I'm trying to think of a reason not to give it a full 10 out of 10 rating. I really am. I mean, I'm sure there are like people who don't have the love of the original game, or people who aren't into the Japanese style are going to have problems with this. I mean, I've seen people describe Final Fantasy VII as the most overrated game of all time, but I also see people describe it the earth as flat. So that tells you how much stock you put in people's opinions. Um, I can't think of a significant flaw. Like I can say it may not appeal to individual taste, but for me it was a nigh on perfect video gaming experience. That if I hadn't been in the middle of a coronavirus thing where I wasn't working, I probably would have gotten a month's gameplay out of this minimum. My playthrough topped 40 hours, so yeah. But I want to experience the story again. I want to deep dive, and I do not want to wait for part two. I want that out now. I want them to say they were secretly working on it the whole time. That's one of the reasons part one was delayed. I haven't looked at reviews or sales or anything like that. I won't be doing that for ages, but seriously, seriously pleased with this product. Yeah, if you're into JRPGs or anything like that, I would strongly recommend checking this out. If you're into the original Final Fantasy VII, I would strongly recommend checking this out. If you're not into the original Final Fantasy VII, or into these games, or played any of these games, or have no knowledge of these games, I would strongly recommend you check this out. If you want to play WWE 2020, don't bother. This is not the game for you. Yeah, that was just some quick thoughts, guys. There'll probably be more on the podcast. On the main Moonbase 2 podcast, there will probably be a Patreon show about it at some point. But until then, let me know what you think. I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.